Every crime is a wound on the world. We're here to dissect it, layer by layer, to find the truth buried within. This is Anatomy of Crime. The air in Corpus Christi, Texas in the spring of 1995 was thick with promise. It carried the scent of salt from the Gulf and the palpable energy of a city that had produced a superstar. That star was Selena Quintanilla-Pérez, and at 23 years old, she was more than just a musical artist. She was a phenomenon. Her smile was a beacon, her voice a bridge between cultures, and her future seemed as boundless as the Texas sky. She had conquered the Tejano music world, a feat for a woman in a genre dominated by men. She had won a Grammy, launched a successful clothing line, and was standing on the precipice of the one thing she and her family had dreamed of for years, a full English-language crossover album, a record that would make her a household name not just in Latin communities, but across the globe. She was a daughter, a wife, a sister, a designer, a role model. She was the embodiment of a dream realized. Imagine standing at that precipice, looking out at an endless horizon of possibility. The world is at your feet, your talent is undeniable, and your work ethic is unmatched. You are surrounded by a loving family that has been with you every step of the way, from performing at local quinceañeras to selling out the Houston Astrodome. You feel protected, you feel loved, you feel invincible. The last thing you would ever suspect is that the greatest danger you face isn't from a stranger in the shadows, but from the person you have come to trust the most, the one who started as your biggest fan, who worked her way into your inner circle, who managed your brand, and who you called your friend. This is the central paradox in the tragedy of Selena. Her life was not taken by a random act of violence. It was extinguished in a sterile motel room by a calculated act of betrayal born from a relationship that had become pathologically twisted. The weapon was a .38 caliber revolver, but the ammunition had been gathering for years, forged in a crucible of obsession, deceit, and a desperate, suffocating need for control. The story of Selena's death is not just the story of a murder. It is the story of a relationship, a bond that was presented to the world as one of ultimate devotion, but which, in private, had become a prison. Today, on Anatomy of Crime, we dissect the anatomy of a toxic friendship. We will trace the path of Yolanda Saldívar from adoring fan to indispensable manager, and finally to convicted killer. We will examine how admiration can curdle into ownership, how trust can be a weapon used against the trusting, and how the person tasked with protecting a star's legacy became the architect of its violent, premature end. This is the story of how the queen of Tejano music was silenced by the one person who claimed to love her most. Selena Quintanilla was born to sing. Born in Lake Jackson, Texas, in 1971, music was not just a passion, it was the family business. Her father, Abraham Quintanilla Jr., had been a musician himself, with the doo-wop group Los Dinos in the 50s and 60s. Though his own musical dreams had faded, he saw a spark in his youngest daughter, a raw, undeniable talent. By the time she was 9 years old, she was the lead singer of the new family band, Selena y Los Dinos, with her older brother A.B. on bass and her sister Suzette on drums. Their early days were a grind, a testament to the family's resilience and Abraham's relentless drive. They honed their craft at weddings, fairs, and restaurants, packed into a tour bus they nicknamed Big Bertha, sacrificing a normal childhood for the pursuit of a shared dream. Abraham's vision was precise. He wanted his children to succeed in the Tejano music market, a vibrant and competitive genre of Spanish-language music blending polka, country, and traditional Mexican folk styles. It was a world dominated by men, and a young woman fronting a band was a rarity. Selena faced criticism early on for her stage presence, deemed too modern, too energetic, but her talent was too immense to be denied. Her voice had a rare combination of power and vulnerability, and her charisma was magnetic. She connected with her audience in a way that felt personal and authentic. She was one of them. As she grew, so did her sound and her fan base. By the late 1980s, Selena We Los Dinos were a regional powerhouse, and in 1989 she signed with EMI Latin, a move that would catapult her to national stardom. Her 1994 album, Amor Prohibido, was a cultural touchstone. It produced 4 number-one Latin hits and became one of the best-selling Latin albums of all time. That same year, she won a Grammy Award for Best Mexican-American Album. She was not just a singer anymore. She was an icon. Her signature style, the bustiers, the high-waisted pants, the red lipstick, was emulated by millions of young Latinas. She opened 2 successful boutiques, Selena etc., selling her clothing designs and offering salon services. All the while, she remained deeply connected to her family and her roots, marrying her guitarist, Chris Perez, in 1992, and living in a modest house next door to her parents in Corpus Christi. She was humble, kind, and famously accessible to her fans. It was this very accessibility, this open-hearted trust, that would unknowingly set the stage for her downfall. Far from the bright lights of Selena's stage, another life was unfolding in San Antonio. Yolanda Saldívar was a woman in her early 30s, living a quiet, unassuming existence. Born in 1960, she had built a career as a registered nurse, working with terminally ill patients and specializing in dermatology. To her colleagues and neighbors, she was a solitary figure, a dedicated professional who lived with her mother. But beneath this placid surface was a history of intense, almost obsessive attachments and questionable behavior. In the 1980s, she had been sued by a dermatologist she worked for, Dr. Faustino Gomez, who accused her of stealing nearly $10,000 from his practice. The case was eventually dismissed after she paid a settlement, but it hinted at a pattern of financial misconduct. Yolanda was also known for her powerful need to be needed. She had developed an unhealthy attachment to a nephew, showering him with gifts and attempting to adopt him, a move which was blocked by the family. She was, by many accounts, a lonely woman searching for something or someone to give her life meaning. In the late 1980s, she found it. She attended a Selena We Los Dinos concert and was immediately captivated. This wasn't casual appreciation. It was a lightning bolt. Selena became the singular focus of Yolanda's life. Her small apartment transformed into a shrine, its walls covered with posters and photos of the singer. She consumed every interview, every song, every piece of information she could find. For Yolanda Saldívar, Selena was not just an entertainer. She was an idol, an obsession, and soon a project. In 1991, Yolanda began a relentless campaign. She repeatedly called Abraham Quintanilla with a proposition. She wanted to start an official fan club for Selena in San Antonio. Abraham, ever the protective manager and father, was initially skeptical. He had heard horror stories of fan clubs run by opportunists who would take fans' money and disappear. He brushed her off, but Yolanda was persistent. She called again and again for months, her tenacity bordering on obsession. Finally, worn down by her persistence and impressed by her apparent passion, Abraham relented. He gave her his blessing, though he offered no financial support. The Selena fan club was born, and Yolanda Saldívar was its founder and president. For Yolanda, this was everything. She poured all her energy into the role, working tirelessly to grow the club's membership. She was incredibly effective. She organized events, sent out newsletters, and managed the distribution of merchandise. She cultivated an image of the ultimate fan, someone whose devotion was pure and whose work ethic was unmatched. From the outside, she was a godsend. She was professional, organized, and seemed to want nothing more than to promote Selena's career. The Quintanilla family, overwhelmed by Selena's exploding fame, saw in Yolanda a responsible and dedicated ally. She was taking a significant burden off their shoulders, and she was doing it for free, seemingly out of pure love for their daughter. In a world of hangerson and people looking for a handout, Yolanda appeared to be the exception. She was the perfect fan. Slowly, methodically, Yolanda Saldívar began to weave herself into the fabric of Selena's life. The fan club was her entry point, the key that unlocked the door to the Quintanilla's inner circle. Her dedication did not go unnoticed. Selena, who valued loyalty above all else, was deeply impressed. Here was a woman who worked a full-time job as a nurse and still dedicated countless hours to her fan club, asking for nothing in return. A friendship began to form, one that Selena believed was built on mutual respect and admiration. Yolanda became a trusted confidant, someone Selena could talk to about the pressures of her career, her dreams, and her personal life. The age difference, Yolanda was 14 years older, added to the dynamic. Yolanda positioned herself as a maternal, protective figure, a steady presence in Selena's whirlwind life. By 1994, Yolanda had made herself indispensable. When Selena decided to launch her clothing boutiques, Yolanda was the natural choice to manage the venture. She quit her stable, well-paying nursing career to work for Selena full-time, first as the manager of the San Antonio boutique and then overseeing both locations. Her control expanded. She was no longer just the fan club president. She was a key business associate, entrusted with Selena's brand and finances. To Selena, this was a logical progression. She was rewarding loyalty with opportunity. To Yolanda, it was the culmination of her plan. She now had legitimate, daily access to her idol. She traveled with Selena, handled her business affairs, and managed a significant portion of her life. From the inside, however, the relationship was beginning to show signs of a deeply unhealthy dynamic. Yolanda's devotion was morphing into a suffocating possessiveness. Employees at the boutiques and in the fan club described her as a tyrant. She was manipulative and controlling, quick to anger, and fiercely territorial when it came to her relationship with Selena. She created a fortress around the star, isolating her from others and positioning herself as the sole gatekeeper. If you wanted to get to Selena, you had to go through Yolanda. She would lie to Selena about the actions of other employees to get them fired, ensuring that anyone she perceived as a rival for Selena's affection or attention was quickly removed. Her obsession was all-consuming. The shrine in her apartment grew more elaborate. She didn't just admire Selena. She seemed to want to absorb her, to own a piece of her. She would gush about Selena in a way that made others uncomfortable, referring to her as if she were her own child. She once told a designer for Selena's clothing line, "I would do anything for Selena. I would kill for Selena." At the time, it might have sounded like hyperbole, the over-the-top declaration of a devoted friend. In hindsight, it was a chilling premonition of a mind that was blurring the lines between love and ownership. Selena, for her part, seemed largely unaware of the extent of Yolanda's manipulative behavior. She was notoriously kind-hearted and non-confrontational. She saw the best in people, and was fiercely loyal to those she considered friends. When employees would complain about Yolanda's erratic and controlling behavior, Selena would often defend her, attributing the issues to stress or misunderstanding. She trusted Yolanda implicitly. She gave her gifts, including a brand new car and a cell phone. She saw a hard-working, loyal friend who had her back. She did not see the jealousy, the deception, or the deep-seated obsession that was curdling just beneath the surface. The friendship was a facade, and behind it, Yolanda Saldívar was not just managing Selena's business. She was methodically taking control of her life, piece by piece. By late 1994, the carefully constructed world Yolanda Saldívar had built for herself began to fracture. The first cracks appeared in the very empire she was tasked to manage, the Selena Etc. boutiques and the fan club. The complaints started as a trickle and soon became a flood. Employees at the boutiques grew tired of Yolanda's abrasive management style, her constant lies, and her erratic behavior. They reported that she was difficult, dishonest, and frequently stole items from the stores. More alarmingly, members of the fan club began to complain directly to the Quintanilla family. They sent letters and made phone calls, all telling the same story. They had paid their membership dues or ordered merchandise packages and received nothing in return. Checks were being cashed, but the promised t-shirts, photos, and CDs never arrived. At first, these complaints were dismissed, but their volume and consistency eventually reached Abraham Quintanilla. His initial skepticism about Yolanda, long dormant, was reawakened. As a shrewd businessman who had managed his daughter's career from the very beginning, he understood that such issues could tarnish Selena's carefully cultivated image. He decided to investigate. What he uncovered was a pattern of systematic deception and embezzlement, far more extensive than he had imagined. He hired a private investigator and started digging into the financial records of both the fan club and the boutiques. He discovered forged checks, discrepancies in the accounting books, and unauthorized charges on company credit cards. Funds were missing, tens of thousands of dollars. Yolanda Saldívar wasn't just a poor manager, she was a thief. The evidence was undeniable. Yolanda had been siphoning money for years, using her position of absolute trust to enrich herself at Selena's expense. For Abraham, this was the ultimate betrayal. On March 9, 1995, he called a meeting with Selena and Suzette. He laid out the evidence, showing them the forged checks and financial statements. Selena was devastated. She refused to believe it, defending Yolanda, her friend. An argument ensued. Abraham was resolute. He told Selena that Yolanda was dangerous, that she was nothing but a thief, and that she needed to be fired immediately. He forbade Yolanda from having any further contact with his daughter. Later that day, Abraham confronted Yolanda himself. The meeting was explosive. He presented her with the evidence of her theft. He told her she was fired, and that if she didn't return the money, he would go to the police. Yolanda's reaction was not one of remorse, but of denial and indignation. Her world was collapsing. Being fired meant more than just losing a job. It meant losing her proximity to Selena, the source of her identity and power. It was an outcome she could not accept. Selena was now caught in an impossible position. On one side was her father, the man who had guided her entire life and career, presenting her with cold, hard proof of betrayal. On the other was Yolanda, the woman she considered one of her closest friends, who was weeping and professing her innocence. Selena was known for her compassion, and the idea that her friend was being falsely accused tormented her. But she was also a businesswoman. She needed the financial records from the boutiques and the fan club to prepare her taxes. These documents, the proof of either innocence or guilt, were in Yolanda's possession. Over the next few weeks, Selena tried to sever ties professionally, while still trying to salvage some kind of personal connection, a decision that proved to be a fatal miscalculation. She agreed to meet with Yolanda one last time, believing she could retrieve the missing bank statements and finally put the matter to rest. It was a meeting from which she would never return. In the final days of March, Yolanda Saldívar's desperation escalated into a cold, calculated plan. Her identity, her entire sense of self, was inextricably linked to Selena. Without that connection, she felt she had nothing. If she couldn't have Selena, then no one could. On March 13th, just 4 days after her confrontation with Abraham Quintanilla, she drove to a gun shop in San Antonio called A Place to Shoot. There, she purchased a .38 caliber Taurus Model 85 revolver and a box of hollow-point bullets, ammunition specifically designed to expand upon impact, maximizing tissue damage. She initially claimed she needed the gun for protection, a flimsy excuse that belied the darkness of her intentions. The purchase of the weapon was a point of no return. She began a campaign of manipulation aimed directly at Selena. She knew Selena's weakness was her empathy. Over the phone, Yolanda was hysterical, claiming she was falling apart, that she couldn't live without Selena. She insisted she had the financial papers Selena needed, but was too emotionally distraught to hand them over in Corpus Christi. She needed Selena to come to her. When that failed, she escalated her tactics. She called Selena and told her a new, horrific lie, that while on a recent business trip to Mexico, she had been beaten and sexually assaulted. This was the perfect lure. She knew Selena's compassionate nature would override any reservations she had. A business dispute was one thing. A friend in desperate need after a violent attack was another. Selena agreed to meet her. On the evening of March 30th, Selena drove to the Days Inn Motel in Corpus Christi, where Yolanda had checked into room 158. The pretext was to pick up the financial documents. When she arrived, Yolanda was emotional but gave her only some of the papers, claiming the rest were back in San Antonio. She repeated the story of her assault. Selena, ever the caring friend, insisted that Yolanda see a doctor the next morning. The trap was set. On the morning of Friday, March 31st, 1995, Selena picked Yolanda up from the Days Inn and took her to a local hospital. There, a physician examined Yolanda and found no physical evidence consistent with a sexual assault. There were no scrapes, no bruises, no signs of violence. Yolanda's story was falling apart. This revelation changed the dynamic completely. Selena was no longer just dealing with a potentially dishonest employee. She was dealing with a pathological liar. She drove Yolanda back to the motel, the mood in the car undoubtedly tense and cold. Back in room 158, the final confrontation occurred. The precise details of their conversation are known only to Yolanda, but the outcome is tragically clear. Selena informed Yolanda that their relationship, both personal and professional, was over. She could no longer be trusted. She had lied about the money, and now she had lied about being assaulted. It was the end. As Selena turned to leave the room, she was taking with her the very reason for Yolanda's existence. In that moment, Yolanda Saldívar made a choice. she reached into her purse, pulled out the .38 revolver, and aimed it at Selena's back. She fired a single shot. The hollow-point bullet entered Selena's right shoulder blade, tearing through her body and severing the subclavian artery, a major vessel that supplies blood to the arm and brain. The injury was catastrophic. Blood began to pour from the wound at an alarming rate, yet, in an astonishing act of strength and will, Selena did not collapse. Fueled by adrenaline and a desperate fight for life, she stumbled out of the room, leaving a trail of blood drops on the carpet and the concrete walkway. She ran past the swimming pool, across the parking lot, towards the safety of the motel lobby, a distance of nearly 400 feet. She burst through the lobby doors and collapsed onto the floor, gasping for breath. The motel staff rushed to her side, horrified by the scene. With her last ounces of strength, she gave them the two most crucial pieces of information they needed to catch her killer. "Yolanda," she whispered, and then, "Room 158. It was her final act, a dying declaration to ensure that justice would be served. Paramedics arrived within minutes and worked frantically to save her, but the damage was too severe. She had lost a catastrophic amount of blood. Selena Quintanilla-Pérez, the 23-year-old queen of Tejano music, was pronounced dead at the hospital shortly after 1 o'clock that afternoon. While Selena was fighting for her life, Yolanda Saldívar remained calm and collected. She returned to her motel room, gathered her belongings, and walked to her red pickup truck in the parking lot. By the time police arrived, responding to reports of a shooting, they found her sitting in the driver's seat. An officer approached the truck, his gun drawn. He saw the revolver in Yolanda's hand. She raised it to her own temple, her finger on the trigger. And so began a tense, agonizing standoff that would last for 9.5 hours, broadcast live to a horrified nation. The Days Inn parking lot became a media circus. The entire area was cordoned off as SWAT teams and police negotiators established a perimeter. The negotiator, Larry Young, made contact with Yolanda via her cell phone. The conversation, which was recorded, became a central piece of evidence in the case. Over the hours, Yolanda was a portrait of contradiction. At times, she was hysterical, weeping and threatening to take her own life. She repeatedly told the negotiator, "I can't believe I killed my best friend." She claimed the shooting was an accident, that the gun just went off. She said she had bought it to protect herself from Abraham Quintanilla, who she claimed was threatening her. At other times, she was eerily calm, discussing her will and her family. The standoff was a slow, psychological battle. Negotiators worked to build a rapport with her, to de-escalate the situation, to convince her that suicide was not the answer. They brought her mother to the scene, hoping her presence would help. But it had little effect. As the sun set on Corpus Christi, the parking lot was illuminated by harsh television lights. Inside the truck, Yolanda Saldívar held the fate of the standoff and the truth of what happened in room 158 in her hands. Finally, just before 9:30 p.m., after hours of painstaking negotiation, her resolve broke. She surrendered, handing over the revolver, and was taken into custody. The standoff was over, but for millions of fans across the world, the nightmare was just beginning. The trial of Yolanda Saldívar was destined to be one of the most high-profile legal battles in Texas history. The murder of Selena sent shockwaves through the Latino community and beyond. The public grief was immense and palpable. In the days following her death, thousands of mourners held vigils, and radio stations played her music non-stop. The case was so sensational, and the public sentiment in Selena's hometown of Corpus Christi so strong, that the defense successfully argued for a change of venue. The trial was moved to Houston in the hope of finding a more impartial jury. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Carlos Valdez, built a straightforward and powerful case for first-degree murder. Their argument was that this was a premeditated act of violence, born of obsession and desperation. They presented a clear timeline of Yolanda's actions, the purchase of the gun, and the particularly lethal hollow-point bullets just weeks before the murder, the repeated lies to lure Selena to the motel. The final, fatal confrontation after her story of being assaulted was exposed as a fabrication. The prosecution argued that when Selena finally severed their toxic relationship, Yolanda, facing the loss of her entire identity, made a deliberate choice to kill her rather than let her walk away. A key piece of the prosecution's evidence was the gun itself. They brought in a firearms expert who testified that the .38 caliber revolver required a significant amount of pressure on the trigger to fire, 11 pounds to be exact. This directly contradicted the defense's claim that the gun just went off. An accidental discharge, the expert explained, was highly improbable. The most powerful testimony, however, came from Selena herself. Her dying words, "Yolanda, room 158, were admitted into evidence as a dying declaration, a recognized exception to the hearsay rule. She had identified her killer with her last breath. The prosecution also played excerpts from the 9.5-hour standoff tape, where Yolanda, despite her claims of an accident, confessed multiple times, wailing, "I killed her." The defense, led by attorney Douglas Tinker, faced an uphill battle. They did not dispute that Yolanda fired the shot that killed Selena. Instead, they built their entire strategy around the argument that it was a tragic accident. Tinker portrayed Yolanda as a distraught, emotionally unstable woman who had bought the gun to take her own life, not Selena's. Their theory was that in the heat of their argument in room 158, Yolanda pulled out the gun to threaten suicide, hoping to garner Selena's sympathy and prevent her from leaving. In this version of events, as Selena turned to go, the gun accidentally discharged. They painted Abraham Quintanilla as a domineering and threatening figure, suggesting Yolanda had legitimate reasons to fear him and to be in a state of emotional turmoil. Tinker's cross-examinations were aggressive, and he attempted to create doubt wherever he could. He argued that the police had mishandled the investigation, failing to preserve evidence that might have supported the accident theory. He also attempted to portray Yolanda as a victim of circumstance, a simple woman pushed to the brink. However, the defense could not overcome the mountain of evidence presented by the prosecution. The premeditated purchase of the weapon, the manipulative lies to arrange the meeting, and the unlikelihood of an accidental discharge from that particular firearm, all pointed towards intent. On October 23, 1995, after a 3-week trial that had captivated the public, the case went to the jury. The 12 men and women deliberated for just over 2 hours. The speed of their decision sent a clear message. They returned with a verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. A few days later, Yolanda Saldívar was sentenced to the maximum penalty, life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. As the verdict was read, she showed little emotion. The woman who had once claimed to be Selena's biggest fan was now officially her convicted killer, destined to spend decades behind bars, forever defined by her final, violent act of betrayal. The conviction of Yolanda Saldívar brought a legal conclusion to the case, but it did little to heal the profound sense of loss felt by millions. Yolanda remains incarcerated at the Mountain View unit in Gatesville, Texas. She has maintained her innocence throughout her imprisonment, consistently claiming the shooting was an accident. In 2025, 30 years after the murder, she will become eligible for parole. The prospect of her release is a source of deep pain and anger for the Quintanilla family and Selena's legion of fans, a reminder that the final chapter of this tragedy has yet to be written. In dissecting the anatomy of this crime, we return to our central theme, the anatomy of a toxic friendship. This case is a chilling study in how devotion can become a disguise for control, and how love can be twisted into a form of ownership. Yolanda Saldívar did not begin as a monster. She began as a fan, a lonely individual who found a sense of purpose and identity by attaching herself to a rising star. But her fandom was not healthy admiration, it was a parasitic obsession. She saw in Selena not a person, but an object, a source of light she could reflect to make her own life feel significant. She systematically isolated Selena, manipulated her trust, and created a codependent relationship where she was the gatekeeper to Selena's world. The dynamic was a fatal one. Selena's greatest strengths, her kindness, her loyalty, her unwavering belief in the goodness of others, were the very vulnerabilities that Yolanda exploited. She mistook possessiveness for protection and control for care. When the web of financial deceit began to unravel, and Abraham Quintanilla threatened to sever that connection, Yolanda's world crumbled. The murder was not a spontaneous act of passion. It was the last desperate act of a controller losing control. If she could not possess Selena in life, she would possess her in death, forever linking their names in a story of tragedy. The murder of Selena Quintanilla-Pérez is a cautionary tale about the darkest side of fandom and the danger of blurring the lines between a public persona and a private life. It reveals the terrifying potential of a singular, obsessive relationship to eclipse all reason and morality. Selena's legacy endures. Her crossover album, Dreaming of You, was released posthumously and debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, making her the first Hispanic artist to achieve the feat. Her music continues to inspire new generations, but her story is now forever entwined with that of her killer. In the end, the bullet that killed Selena Quintanilla-Pérez was forged not just of lead and gunpowder, but of years of simmering resentment, possessive adoration, and the devastating power of a friendship that had become a cage. This has been Anatomy of Crime, where the truth is never simple, but always worth seeking.